time to have a look at some of the things happening in the world of politics. We do that with Dr. Jim Jose, our Professor of Politics out of the University of Newcastle, who... Well, today, Jim, will take a look back in time. That's something that in some respects may seem like a lifetime ago, but we're kind of picking up with the life of Albo and co after the referendum, and there's been a lot of other stuff happened in that time. So good morning, firstly.
Yeah, good morning, Mark. I think part of this is more, in a sense, media beat-up, driven partly by... every time we have a poll, we can then have from a journalist point of view, we can write a story about it. Mm. So the poll frequency is one of those elements, and prime ministers, regardless of their stripes, are going to come under stick. Every 2 weeks, someone's going to, or 3 weeks, whatever the time period is. But I think the issues around, is Albo toast? I think you mentioned a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Probably not. There's a lot of other things going on. He may face much more flack come next Tuesday when it's possible that the Reserve Bank will hike interest rates, something that the Prime Minister personally and the government specifically has no individual control. But the Albo's become the sort of the whipping post, if you like. It's his fault that everything went sour with the referendum, or his fault that it didn't go right, etc. Now, I think there are lots of reasons, and one can debate the different possibilities of why things didn't go the way one side wanted or why they went the way the other side wanted. But the thing that stood out for me, stepping back from the actual issues themselves and looking at, what did this mean about the sort of the democratic process? And the thing that stood out for me was the slogan, a very effective and very, very well pushed slogan, if you don't know, vote no. Now, for the no side of the campaign, it was very effective. But if we take a look at this from the perspective of the operation of a properly functioning democracy, one of the premises that we operate with is that the electorate, those who cast their votes, actually know something about what's going on, that they are relatively informed. Now, way back in the 19th century, John Stuart Mill, the liberal philosopher, basically made the argument that we shouldn't be extending the franchise to the wider population until such time as they've been well enough educated into understanding society and how the system works, rather than simply giving everyone who can stand up and breathe and over a certain age, give them the vote. Now, that was seen as a rather elitist argument. But it was...
I can hardly imagine why.
It was built around that idea, Mark, that when you're casting your vote, you're doing so to support somebody to get elected so that they will vote on our behalf. They will make decisions, one hopes, in the common good, or at least in the line of when party politics developed, along the lines of which particular party they belong to. Now, the idea that this, if you don't know, vote no, the deeper that gets embedded into our political system of doing things, come the next election, well, I don't know what's going on, I'll just simply rip up the ballot paper, or I don't know what's going on, I'll just put a cross here and ignore it.
The things I hate the most, by the way, of just throwing a piece of paper away, but people do.
And in a sense, one shouldn't blame people for doing that, because it's become, after the referendum, a baseline that people can go to and say, well, I don't know, so it doesn't matter what I do. It does matter, of course, what people do in a normal election, where it's not simply a binary choice between yes or no, where there are choices between a number of possibilities. And we also have a preferential system, which means that whatever vote you cast will count in some way eventually to the final outcome. So in a sense, we're at a tipping point in terms of people's engagement with the political system. And I get that people can be browned off with the way the system works and so forth. But in terms of understanding the political system, there is a minimal level that we all should be involved with, because I think it was a ancient Greek statesman, I think it was Pericles, who said something like, just because you're not taking an interest in politics doesn't mean politics isn't taking an interest in you.
No, absolutely. And everything's happening around us.
So we need to be, aware of some of the broader things that are going on politically, and to have some understanding how that political system operates. What are the key pillars of it? What are the main dimensions that we should be aware of?
All right, so let's go from the slogan and work back to go forward if we can. We'll try and throw a lot into a couple of minutes, but if you don't know, don't. If you don't know, vote no. Now, either people voted to the 61 or 62% no based on, well, we have an idea of how we think it'll work and no is for us, or you're right, I don't know anything about it, so I'll vote no. I think both are probably, either way, bad news. I think the slogan is more bad news for Albo than the other, because for a guy that, rightly or wrongly, from day one of becoming Prime Minister, tied everything to the referendum, at seemingly to the expense of every other issue, like interest rates, like cost of living.
Look, Mark, I think I have to interrupt you there. That was how it was projected.
But there was no talk on any of the main things that were. I'm not. Hey, if you want to go for something and prosecute an issue, absolutely. But then you've also got to say afterwards, well,
there was plenty of things going on that could have been reported, but weren't. There were plenty of issues that the government
checked your power bill lately. It hasn't gone down.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean the government's not necessarily. Let me put it this way: I'm not wanting to advocate for the government here, but it doesn't mean that the government itself wasn't doing things and trying to get things done on a whole range of issues. Immigration, for example, taxation. There's a whole heap of reform around the public service that's going on. All of that was happening, and all of that involved the Prime Minister in one way or another.
But wouldn't that still make my point correct, though, that if the government actually were doing 100 other things in the background that would be perceived as good things, if they're unable to prosecute that issue, prosecute that point, I mean, from an electorate point of view, if people aren't paying attention to politics, it's not going to matter. Therefore, he's a lame duck.
Well, that's how that's being projected, but there's certainly no sense in which his conduct post-referendum has involved any of that sort of I'm fixated on one issue type things.
Oh, he's walked away from it.
He's just had a successful visit to the US, which is being represented, he is being represented as, I think the opposition are now calling him Airbus or Albo, because he's travelling and going.
That's been around for a while, but yes, it's a point,
So that's going to be elevated. But I think the thing that I would come back to is, regardless of the pros and cons and who's doing what and who's getting credit and so forth, coming back to the sort of strategy that was employed in the referendum process, in which it was sort of reduced to this sort of 5 or 6 word slogan, and there was absolutely no concern with accuracy or whatever of the information that was being circulated, that we are seeing a new baseline being drawn about how politics will move in the future. And it's likely to be the case that it doesn't matter what the party and government does in the future, that the opposition will simply be able to tunnel in underneath them and totally avoid the issues themselves and undermine the process by simply throwing anything out there that they like, because they know it's now reasonably, it's becoming accepted that it doesn't matter what you say, you'd never have to pay a price for it. Now, people who are in government positions, of course, do have to pay a price for whatever they say, and then elected members of the government will. Elected members of the opposition generally don't pay the price until they're in government, and then they find that the shoe is now on the other foot.
Oh, it's much easier to be harder in hard line in opposition.
So to come back to our starting point about Albo being toast, at the moment, no, I don't think he is, but he is, I think, now going to face an opposition, one that's been galvanised by the outcome of the referendum, galvanised in the sense that whatever it does, the public is not going to react against it until they're in government. And then once they're in government, it doesn't matter. They've got 3 years, so they're fine. I think that the undermining of the processes of our democracy are things that we need to be really concerned about. And I'm not quite sure what the government can do about it. It's made the Labor Party made promises coming into their election that they were going to fix this and they were going to fix that, and they've sort of fixed half of this and half of that. They've got a long way to go to actually live up to some of those promises.
I'm not sure that they've fixed power bills, though. I'm not sure that they've fixed the cost of living, and they're the things that people will vote on, because now that the referendum is gone, that's sailing into the background.
Fixing the power bills and fixing the cost of living, I think, are things that governments struggle to do regardless. And we can look back over, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Not one government can say that they fixed the cost of living. They are, in many respects, at the mercy of forces that are largely beyond their control. They can set some broad parameters, but they're not likely to be able to sort of press a button and something happens. So it's going to be
Absolutely agreed. And then before we run out of time, because we probably have that, but then I would pick up on your point, Jim, that paying the price, which you mentioned. If the opposition has got any smarts at all, from now on they will hit remind people of the $275 promise on power bills, which was mentioned just shy of 100 times. Remind people to look at their notice from the bank on your mortgage and what it costs to buy petrol and all of those. They should be doing it already.
They may well be reminding them come next Tuesday, which is be unfortunate for the government, but the Reserve Bank's approach has been one that is basically sacrifices a certain part of the population in order to bring down inflation.
True.
Which is a shall we say, a so-called principle of economic thought, which one might take issue with or should take issue with, because inflicting misery on some part of the population in order to keep people with money better off or well off or sustained, maybe that's not necessarily the way to go. Maybe there are better ways or other ways, and certainly other economists might say the Reserve Bank should step back and look at other things that they could be doing, which we'll have to wait and see. But, Albos will not be looking forward to next Tuesday.
Absolutely. And before we drift off into interest rates, I'm going to let you drift out the door. Jim, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mark.
Emeritus Professor of Politics, Dr. Jim Jose out of the University of Newcastle at 2NURFM 103.7.
Designing a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.